surreal. Yeah, well, yeah, I can. I mentioned my difficulties with Barnes & Noble putting the books in the romance section. This was kind of no, the surrealness had nothing to do with Barnes & Noble. It was to do with the romance thing. It was not actually a bad marketing decision, as my agent said to me when he called. He said, you know, the hardcover just goes up front with all the other hardcover fiction, but they'd like to try and sell the paperback as romance. And I said, as what? I said, you know, I like well-written romance. I read it. I said, but I've read enough of it to know that's not what I'm writing at all. I said, you do this, and you will cut off the entire male half of my readership, which is a big deal. You know, men see different things in these books than women do. They like them as much, but they see different things, and they respond to them. Well, he was a man. He said, yeah, I understand. He said, we could insist that they call it science fiction or fantasy because of the other weird elements. He said, but bear in mind, a bestseller in SFF is 50,000 in paperback. Bestseller in romance is 500,000. So you got a point. So as my first editor used to say, these have to be word-of-mouth books because they're too weird to describe to anyone. So I said, well, assuming that's true, then obviously it makes more sense to expose them to 500,000 people who all go tell their friends, and you know, as soon as they read them, they will realize that they're not romances. So that's where we began. I had an agreement with Random House, which they honorably stuck to, which was that if the books became visible, which is publisherese for hit the New York Times list, they would change the billing essentially and relabel them as fiction, which they very honorably did. Barnes & Noble's attitude was, well, you called your first book a romance, so everything you write for the rest of your life is a romance too, including March on. Yeah, so yeah, that's where that came from. So anyway, this was the first book, and so to publish it, my editor called up and said, well, we're so excited. We got permission from the marketing department to give away 1,200 copies of your book at this year's RWA convention. That's the Romance Writers of America. They're a big group, very influential. It's a very good group as well. But anyway, this was a big, huge deal because romances were never, ever published in hardcover. This was a big, fancy hardcover book. So I went, I'd never been to an RWA convention, so I went up with no expectations, so to speak, but being rather cautious. Anyway, I checked in at the registration desk and gave them my name. They said, like they always do, how do you spell that? And I held out my badge and said, like that. Well, actually, she was sitting in front of a pile of Outlanders, and so I pointed and said, like that. She turned around, looked at the book, and turned around, looked at me, sprang to her feet, grabbed my hand, and plastered it to her rather large bosom and said, it's you! Are we out of time here? Or?
Let's sneak in one more.
Yeah, okay.
Let's sneak in.
Yeah, why don't you pick one?
Down here in front in the red.
Okay.
What's next? What's 2015? What's 2016? Gabaldon land.
Oh, what's next? Yeah, well, the next thing that you will probably get is a novella called Virgins, which is about Jamie Fraser and his not-yet brother-in-law. Jamie's age 19 and Ian 20, and this is about their experiences in France in 1740. It was originally published in an anthology. I get the reprint rights back in December. So at that point, you will either get it as a standalone ebook or as part of a collection of novellas, but it'll be widely accessible. The next thing that happens in 2015 is The Outlandish Companion, Volume 2. That book has been, paralleling all my other projects for the last 3 years, so it's almost done. I need about 6 months of concerted work to just fill in the last bits that I need to do. So I plan to deliver it, if all goes well, to my publisher around January, February, and then it's up to them when they publish it. But that's what I'm thinking. As for book 9, etc., I have been on the road for a solid month. I had a 2-week break, and now we're going to do this for the next week, and then I'm going to the UK and do that for a while. And so I won't get my regular writing routine back until September. At that point, I will sort of sit down and listen and see what's talking to me.
Thank you.